5. April 1943. Oflag IV-C, Colditz Castle, Saxony, Germany. The morning roll call drags on in the cobbled courtyard as mist lifts off the Mulde valley and the wind cuts through the thin greatcoats of the Allied officers standing in fives. One of them, Flight Lieutenant Jack Best of the Royal Air Force, watches the German guards count lips and caps with the bored precision of men who believe the place around them is escape-proof. For nearly 3 years of war, Best has moved from one camp to another, always trying to break out, always dragged back under rifle barrels and shouted orders. Now he is in the prison for men like him, the men the Germans call the incorrigibles, the serial escapers sent to this steep castle on a rock to be contained, catalogued, and, above all, defeated. He feels the usual tension at Appel, the prisoner's awareness that numbers are dangerous things, that any miscount can bring dogs, searches, solitary, and beatings. He keeps his expression careless and faintly amused, a look that has annoyed more than one guard. Inside, his mind is working, measuring timings, distances, the blind corners of the courtyards, the gaps in German habits. Around him, uniforms from across the empire stand in the same line. British, Dutch, Polish, French, Belgian. Best thinks, not for the first time, that the Germans are right about one thing. If there is anywhere to prove Colditz is not escape-proof, it is here, among men who refuse to accept captivity as anything but a temporary inconvenience. From above, from a camera's eye, the same scene looks different. This is Oflag IV-C, Colditz, a special camp holding a fluctuating population of roughly 400 to 600 Allied officers at any time, guarded by several hundred German soldiers and security staff. It stands in eastern Germany, on a cliff above the town of Colditz, ringed by walls that in some places drop sheer to the river. The German High Command has declared it secure, the end of the line for troublesome prisoners. Yet by the spring of 1943, Colditz has already spawned dozens of escape attempts and a growing folklore of tunnels, disguises, forged papers, stolen uniforms, and bold failures. Field Marshal Goering's boast that the castle is unbreakable has become a challenge eagerly accepted by the people he is trying to hold. In this closed world, escape has become duty, craft, and quiet revenge. Officers organize themselves into national groups, each with an escape officer and committees that track tools, maps, civilian clothes, and intelligence. They measure floorboards, steel wire, count bricks, time sentries, and keep up a relentless campaign of deception. German security responds with searches, X-raying beams, sealing windows, limiting work parties, installing better lighting, adding more wire. The struggle is measured in centimeters of tunnel and seconds of inattention. Into this duel steps the idea that will define Jack Best, not just to go over the wall, but to bend the numbers themselves, to turn the sacred ritual of roll call into a weapon. When Appel ends and the courtyard drains of bodies, Best walks back to his quarters under escort, boots echoing on stone steps worn down by centuries. In the cramped rooms, he loosens his collar and sits at a rough table littered with cigarette ends and scraps of Red Cross parcels. The air smells of ersatz coffee, stale bread, and damp plaster. Here in the British quarters, they talk in low voices about last night's BBC News smuggled in through hidden radios, about bombings over Essen, Tunis, Hamburg, about rumors of an Allied landing somewhere in Europe. Best listens, but his thoughts stay fixed on the Germans' obsession with counting. Every morning and evening, The guards demand order. 5 men per rank, the same faces in the same place, numbers squared against neat lists. Any missing man triggers lockdowns, searches, and a chain of questions that leads from courtyard to gate to railway station. Best has seen the power of those lists. He has watched German officers run fingers down columns of names, watched them turn suspicion into punishment, watched escapes destroyed because the alarm sounded too quickly. It occurs to him now, as it has to others, that the real problem in Colditz is not just the walls, but time. Every escape attempt dies if the Germans realize too soon that someone is gone. Sitting at the table, turning a crust of bread in his hand, he understands the simple, dangerous thought clearly. If a prisoner could disappear on paper while still inside the castle, if the Germans could be made to believe he had already escaped, then that man would become free to move in the shadows, to work, to dig, to conspire. He would be a ghost behind enemy wire. The wider record of the war that April underlines how radical that thought is. In early 1943, as Best and his comrades paced the courtyards of Colditz, the German Sixth Army has already surrendered at Stalingrad after losing hundreds of thousands of men. And in North Africa, the Axis forces are being driven back towards Tunisia, where over 250,000 German and Italian troops will soon be captured. Allied factories in Britain, the United States, Canada, and occupied free territories are producing aircraft, tanks, and ships in quantities the German economy is struggling to match. In the air, the RAF and USAAF increase bombing raids. At sea, U-boats suffer rising losses. Yet inside Germany's borders, and especially in a special camp like Colditz, the apparatus of control still feels rigid and confident. The Germans maintain meticulous paperwork for each prisoner. Photographs, numbers, personal details, capture reports. They have learned from earlier escapes, issuing tokens to guards, tightening identity checks, punishing collective infractions. For them, roll call is sacred proof that the system still works, that even while fronts shift and armies retreat, the men locked in this castle remain accounted for, controlled, contained. Against that bureaucratic faith, Jack Best's idea takes shape. To use German belief in their own records against them, to vanish officially without leaving, and in doing so to fool his guards not for hours, but for weeks on end. It will not need explosives or gunfire. It will need nerve, patience, and a careful understanding of how numbers can lie while every man remains inside the walls. The plan begins in silence. Jack Best and 2 trusted officers from the British contingent, Captain Pat Reed and Lieutenant John Bosun Wilson, gather after lights out in the attic that the Germans rarely inspect. They spread out their hand-copied versions of camp regulations, each line annotated over months of observation. Every escape attempt in Colditz begins with intelligence, and this one depends not on tunneling or stealing uniforms, but on understanding the habits of the guards. The Germans, they note, keep 2 main records of every prisoner's presence: the personal identification card, stored in the Kommandantur office, and the daily headcount sheets filled out by each block sergeant during appel. These sheets, once stamped and filed, form the camp's official confirmation that all prisoners are present. The idea seems impossible at first. How can a man be declared missing when his body is still behind the wire? Yet Best argues that the system's own rigidity offers the opportunity. If they can remove one man's name from the roll without raising suspicion, then during the next few days, the Germans will believe he has already escaped. While the search spreads across Germany's railways and police checkpoints, That missing man will move freely inside the castle, unseen and uncounted, preparing a real escape. The others listen in the darkness as Best outlines how it could be done. A forged pass, a duplicate key to the cellar where records are stored, and the careful alteration of a single number on a single list. At this stage of the war, Allied escape networks in German camps operate almost like small industries. Across Europe, an estimated 10,000 officers and men are held in Oflags, Stalags, and labor camps, guarded by roughly 500,000 Germans assigned to internal security. Every camp develops a miniature economy of barter and invention. Red Cross parcels become currency. Chocolate, cigarettes, and condensed milk trade for tools, maps, and favors. Skilled prisoners act as forgers, carpenters, and tailors. At Colditz, the British maintain one of the best-equipped forgery sections in captivity, hidden under floorboards and disguised as a storage closet. They have ink from ground berries, stamps made from boot heels, and paper scavenged from packing materials. In 1942, they produced a replica Wehrmacht pass so accurate that a real German officer complimented the typography without recognizing it. It is this secret infrastructure that allows Best's plan to advance. Within a week, Wilson acquires blank forms from a Tetum, sympathetic orderly. Reed's team creates a copy of the Kommandantur's daily attendance sheet using tracing paper smuggled from Red Cross parcels. Their task is to make one minor change: convert the present mark beside a particular name into a dash meaning missing, and then to switch the real sheet before it reaches the main office. Best volunteers to be the ghost, the man who will vanish. His reasoning is cold but logical. He speaks passable German, knows the castle's corridors, and his previous escape attempts have taught him how the guards react during a search. On the surface, life in Colditz continues as usual. Prisoners exercise in the courtyard, exchange parcels and stage plays in the theater to relieve monotony. Behind that routine, preparations move carefully. Reed times how long it takes the block sergeant to walk from the British quarters to the main office. Exactly 6 minutes. Wilson studies the guard's handwriting to mimic it. Best observes the evening appel, counting the seconds between each name called. The trick, they realize, is not only to alter the record, but to ensure the next few roll calls match the deception. If the Germans count one man fewer but find no missing face, suspicion will fall instantly. They need a substitute, someone to stand in Best's place for 2 or 3 calls until the missing notice circulates through German channels. That role falls to Lieutenant Desmond "Paddy" O'Neill, similar in build and height. Under the dim courtyard lights, wrapped in the same RAF greatcoat, he can stand 2 places to the right and confuse the guards who rely on rough shapes more than faces. When Best finally disappears, O'Neill will fill his spot until the Germans adjust their lists. The risk is enormous. Discovery could bring solitary confinement or worse, and aiding the deception makes everyone complicit. Yet inside the stone walls where every man dreams of freedom, risk is the only currency left. While these preparations unfold in Colditz, the outside war grinds forward in numbers that dwarf the struggles of individual men. In April 1943, Allied production reaches new records. 7,700 aircraft built in a single month in the United States, over 2 million tons of merchant shipping launched, and nearly 200,000 soldiers arriving in North Africa for the final push against the Axis. Germany, meanwhile, faces acute shortages of fuel, aluminum, and trained pilots. The once invincible Luftwaffe has lost over 12,000 aircraft in the past 2 years. The Eastern Front consumes entire divisions monthly. Casualty reports from the Wehrmacht list 1.6 million losses since June 1941. Yet none of this is known to the prisoners, except through scraps of BBC News passed along by secret radios. They sense the war's turning, but cannot see it. To them, escape remains personal, a way to rejoin the fight, or at least to prove that German control is never absolute. Best's plan is part of that invisible front. Ishtal, small campaign fought with pens, paper, and timing instead of guns. Late at night, as guards' footsteps echo in the corridor, he rehearses the move in his mind. The forged sheet folded under a sleeve, the quick exchange at the guardroom door, the steady walk back past the sentry, who never suspects that the man before him is already, officially, gone. Jack Best waits until the castle is quiet. He has rehearsed this moment in his head so many times that the pattern of the guard's footsteps has become music. The attic smells of dust, old wood, and mothballs. His palms are damp but steady. He slips the forged attendance sheet into the inner pocket of his greatcoat, folded to the exact shape and weight of the real sheet, so no hand would suspect the difference. Outside, lights burn in the sentry posts, and the familiar clatter of the commandantur's keys can be heard as the duty sergeant moves through corridors to collect the day's records. Best keeps his shoulders low, keeps his chin tucked so the sentry will only see the line of his jaw and the peak of his cap. He moves in the rhythm of men who have learned that in a place built to hold people, the smallest pause can become opportunity. He crosses the corridor at the measured pace he has practiced, nods to Lieutenant O'Neill, who stands 2 places over in the line rehearsed to the last breath, and steps through the door that leads to the stair the commandantur guard uses between the office and the yard. For a moment, his heart beats as if it will burst. Then he slides into the shadow, behind a pillar, watches the duty sergeant take the bundle of forms and pass them without looking. It is 6 minutes, the exact time Reed measured. 6 minutes between leaving the block and the sergeant reaching the office. 6 minutes to change the world. In the wider frame, the technique Best is about to apply is a study in wartime bureaucracy and human trust. German camps like Colditz rely on systems that are detailed and precise because precision is how order is built into confinement. The commandantur keeps personnel files with photographs, capture locations, and fingerprints. They stamp attendance sheets, file them, and then copy the data into camp registers. Each step adds redundancy and, paradoxically, more room for complacency. At the commandantur in April 1943, the routine is mechanical. The duty sergeant collects forms, hands them to the clerk who checks stamps, and then a small stack is filed in numerical order. The prison administration trusts the ritual. Trust becomes a lever when someone understands the ritual's motion. Across Europe, both sides of the conflict run on paperwork, in factories producing tanks and planes, in rail yards scheduling troop movements, in offices tallying rations. Mistakes happen not because men are careless, but because systems are run at scale and assume good faith. Best's plan exploits that assumption. He does not need to move mountains or bribe a guard to the point of ruin. He only needs to create a false state in a single paper trail and then let the bureaucracy complete the lie for him. If the commandantur believes the absence is authentic, its systems will broadcast that belief to police at a rail station, to the local Gestapo, and to the files that record escaped men. For weeks, perhaps, Best could be an unaccounted-for name on a list, while his feet keep walking the safe, shadowy spaces inside the castle wall. Inside the castle, the moment is acute and small. Best slips behind the clerk's desk when the guard turns his back to fetch a stamp. He has practiced the clerk's handwriting and the exact shape of the pen strokes. He remembers the clerk's habit of looping his G's a little wide, of pressing harder on the downstrokes. He moves with the calm of a man pretending to be other than he is. His fingers are steady as he exchanges the real sheet for the forged one. The forged line sits in the stack with its new mark, a neat dash, the code that in the commandantur's shorthand means absent rather than present. He replaces the papers exactly as he found them, folds the stack the right way, and slips away before the guard turns back. On the stairs, he nearly breathes out, but he does not. He covers his tracks the way a man covers a grave, with something simple and ordinary, like another man's cigarette butt tucked in a corner to suggest someone had been there. He returns to the attic, sits beneath the beams, and waits. In the courtyard, O'Neill stands where he was told to stand, shoulders broad, doing nothing but being visible. If anyone looks closely, if a guard squints at faces and remembers a mole or a missing button, the scheme will fail. In these minutes, Best feels how small a world of chance is. One misremembered eyebrow can bring dogs and iron to a man's door. He breathes and thinks only of the next stage, the slow erosion of official certainty and the opening it will make. Beyond the castle gate, the war's numbers keep marching. The year 1943 sees logistics and production reshaping the conflict in ways no single man can stop. In March, the Allies have intensified air attacks on the Ruhr, Britain's bomber command, and the American 8th Air Force inflicting daily tonnage on factories. U-boat losses begin to mount. By mid-1943, German wolf packs admit they are near a turning point. The German economy strains under multiple demands: weapons, vehicles, fuel, and manpower. Yet on the home front and in camp administration, the machinery of control remains meticulous. The Wehrmacht issues orders for documentation and accountability because, in a society mobilized for total war, paperwork binds millions of actions into what appears as coherent policy. When a man is declared absent, that declaration moves through channels. It becomes a message to local police, a line on a telegraph sent to station commanders, a number written into a ledger that covers transportation and security. Best's trick works because those channels are tuned to accept the commandantur's voice. The very scale of the war makes certain lies easier to maintain. Thousands of trains, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and millions of tons of supplies mean that attention is always divided, and that an absent name in a province may simply disappear into the noise of conflict. Best knows this only dimly. The men who run the commandantur know it as a weakness and a hazard. He gambles that on a quiet month, when the front demands everything, one forged dash will not be noticed. For 3 mornings after Best's move, routine masks the change. Appel is the same. Boots in lines, the cold air biting, the guards' voices crisp. The head count proceeds, but this time when the block sergeant runs his pencil down the list, he pauses over Best's name, blinks, and moves on. The roll calls proceed. The stamped papers circulate to adjacent posts, and somewhere a clerk files a copy into a register. The commandantur's confidence grows because nothing dramatic happens. Search dogs are not released. No one calls the nearby towns. Inside the castle, Best moves like a shadow. He performs small tasks that keep him invisible. He helps mend a torn blanket in the infirmary. He volunteers to stack firewood in a corner of the courtyard, where the sentry rarely looks. He watches the guards with the interest of a man monitoring the tides. Each day the official record deepens its lie, and the castle becomes a place where a man can be both declared gone and still walk the same stone corridors. Still, every hour is a knife edge. A visiting official could demand a face-to-name check at any moment. A supply train could stop unexpectedly, and the guards be pulled away. Best knows his luck will not hold indefinitely. So he uses the space created by the false absence to do what escape men always do: prepare. They conceal tools, cut down a plank at the exact place they will need it, fashion a key from scrap metal, and sketch routes that will take them beyond the wall. The forged sheet is not the escape itself, but the cloak under which the real action begins. The documentary pattern of prisoners' resistance is visible in these days. Across Germany and in occupied Europe, captives use similar methods of deception. In 1940 and 1941, many escapes are simple, bold runs against fences. By 1943, they have become more like small wars of invention. Prisoners use their technical skills: engineers refining lockpicks, tailors making civilian clothes, cooks learning how to preserve meat with salt, to create tools that a physics professor or carpenter back home would recognize. They read maps drawn from memory and from smuggled fragments of newspapers. They trade information about train timetables and civilian attitudes. The most successful escape organizations are those that treat escape as a project: logistics, procurement, contingency plans, and rehearsals. In Colditz, the international character of the camp creates an advantage. Men from different nations carry knowledge of the local languages, of rail systems, of occupational skills. The British are good at forgery and a stiff poker face. The Dutch have experience of moving in civilian clothes in neutral zones. The French bring practical skills of blending and disguise. When a method like Best's works, it is because it taps into this collective craftsmanship. Above all, the camps generate networks, lines of communication linking men who will later act as helpers in the outside world: rail workers, farmers, or sympathetic civilians who may turn a blind eye. The scale is not grand, but the stakes are high. A single man walking out of the camp is more than a name on a ledger. He becomes a node in a larger system of resistance that matters to war aims on both tactical and symbolic levels. Inside Colditz, Best advances with the careful courage of a man who understands timing. He uses the forged absence to get access to restricted areas under pretexts that now seem ordinary. He volunteers for laundry duty in a wing that faces the outer wall. He offers his services to the man who catalogs Red Cross parcels, learning how boxes arrive and leave the storerooms. One afternoon, he finds himself in the cellar beneath the western curtain, where beams and barrels are stacked. In the cellar, under a tangle of rope and moth-eaten sacks, he reaches into the dark and feels a plank that has been loose for years. He examines it and knows at once it will make a passage if he can remove it and hide the gap. He returns during hours when work parties are out and sits on a crate, shaping a thin strip of metal into the form of a hinge. He conceals the strip under his sleeve. Each night, he moves a nail 0.5 millimeter, the tiniest adjustments that will add up to a space wide enough to slip through when the time comes. He is always careful to be seen doing mundane tasks so that the guards will not suspect him of anything unusual. The forged absence gives him the freedom to be in places men declared elsewhere cannot be. It is an odd freedom to carry. To be both missing from the lists and present in the workrooms. To be officially gone and yet still fold sheets for men who count on him to help. The paradox makes his resolve sharper. Every night, before he sleeps, he writes in a small torn page he keeps hidden: I am here. I am at hand. In the morning, he tears the page and burns it. the act steadies him. Outside the walls, the war's machinery continues to beat time in heavy numbers. Shipyards in the United States and Great Britain build at a rate that staggers older officers' imaginations. Liberty ships and convoy tonnage increasing monthly, opening long supply lines that the German Navy cannot permanently cut. By mid-1943, the balance in production and logistics begins to favor the Allies in a way that will become decisive. On land, the Axis retreats in North Africa and the Eastern Front remains a grinding attrition that Germany cannot replenish without stretching its economy thin. In such a strategic climate, the morale impact of escapes and the psychological symbolism of prisoners who outwit their captors take on outsized importance. For the Allies, every successful escape is propaganda and proof that German control is not natural or inevitable. For the Germans, every failure to prevent an escape is an embarrassment that demands tighter control and more central oversight. Best's trick, therefore, matters beyond his person, because it reveals how a vent of human ingenuity can expose an institutional blind spot. The larger war proceeds, but inside the castle the old rules of honor and resistance still matter. Men risk themselves not only to rejoin arms, but to demonstrate that even in a state of total war, human cunning can find purchase in the cracks of a system. The forged absence holds for nearly 2 weeks. In that time, Best and a small team complete the preparations that will allow for the next phase. The night move through the hidden plank and across the courtyard to the service yard, where a cover of laundry carts and smoke from a late winter burn pile will help conceal motion. They mark the guard rotations in their heads, memorize the pattern of the searchlights, and time the wagons that pass outside the eastern gate. The plan is not to run for a train the first night, because the risk of immediate capture is too high. Instead, they will use the forged absence to create a window of days when the Kommandantur's belief in the escape will spread outwards and cause railway officials to assume a man has already set off. Within those days, Best will move along shadowed routes. Then, after the immediate panic has waned, he will reappear as a man on the run outside the castle perimeter, blending into the confusion of war. The men practice silently, pantomiming the lift of the plank, the slide of a shoulder through a gap, the hush of boots on gravel. At dusk, they rehearse the roles each will play: the lookout, the runner, the man who will feign illness to delay a check. The danger is not simply the risk of being shot at the wire. The danger is discovery that will produce punishment not only for the escapee, but for anyone connected. The consequences feel very close and very real. Bread rations withheld, letters returned to sender, solitary, and the collapse of trust inside the tiny society they have made among themselves. When the day of the move approaches, Best sits in the half-light of the attic with O'Neill and Reed and looks at the faces of the men who will come with him. They are tired, hungry, but bright with a determination that comes from owning the moment. He thinks of the forged dash in the Kommandantur file and how it has already altered reality. A small piece of ink on a page has changed the actions of men at rail stations and in town offices. Dispatches have been sent that list him as absent from Colditz and last seen at a station many kilometers away. It is a strange and terrible power for a human to bear, the ability to make paper lie and to watch institutions believe that lie. He knows the trick may not get them to freedom. It may only buy days that could be swallowed by chance. Yet as he looks at the men, steady in their resolve, he also feels the old confidence that once sent him into the air over enemy territory. That training, quick thinking, and steady nerves can tilt a moment towards survival. He closes his eyes for a minute and offers a short, private vow to move whenever the castle allows the opening. Then he opens them and steps into the plan. He waits until the castle breathes slow. The dusk light leaks through the slit windows and paints the attic boards with thin lines. The other men have slipped away to their posts of duty and distraction, leaving Best alone for the minutes that matter. He has rehearsed every motion until it lives in his bones. The lift of a plank by the pantry door, the feel of rough timber under his fingers, the exact angle that allows a shoulder to pass without catching on the beams. He loosens the strap of his greatcoat, tucks a small length of wire he has filed down into the cuff, and glances once more at O'Neill standing at the appointed place in the yard where the sentry's eyes rarely rest for long. The forged absence is still in the commandantur ledger, a neat dash that has already traveled on formal channels. The clerks have stamped it, the copies have been filed, and dispatches elsewhere now list him as last seen at a station beyond the immediate district. That bureaucratic fiction buys him time but not safety. He counts the guard rotations in his head: 2 men at the gate, 1 at the tower, 1 with a lantern circling the courtyard at uneven intervals. He times the tower's sweep. He breathes with the slow control he learned in the air, and then he moves. He slips down from the attic, keeps his hands empty and visible in case a patrol passes, and steps into the cellar doorway. The air is cooler there, and the sound of a distant radio, illicit and muffled, feels like a pulse under the stone. He pries back the loose plank with fingers that do not tremble now. The wood gives with a reluctant groan. For a moment he freezes, listening for any sound of suspicion. None comes. He slides through the gap and pulls the plank back into place with the practiced ease of a man who has done the same movement 100 times in rehearsal. The gap is small and the crawl is tight. His jacket scrapes the dirt. His face tastes of dust. He emerges in the service yard beneath an overhang of laundry carts, and the outside world smells of wet earth and smoke. O'Neill gives a single small nod from the shadow, where he waits like a silhouette of trust. The exit is not explosive. It is slow, precise, and measured. It uses the smallest human movements to transgress great walls. Outside the castle, the fondation, architecture of war and transport, turns in a rhythm that swallows single lives into larger patterns. The railways that snake through Saxony and across central Germany carry soldiers, munitions, and food. They also carry gossip and lost men. By mid-1943, Germany's rail system moves thousands of tons daily under pressure from the front. The Deutsche Reichsbahn has to coordinate military logistics that stretch from the Russian front back to occupied France, and its timetables are congested. For a single man declared absent in Colditz to vanish in those schedules is plausible because the system is overloaded with higher priorities. At the same time, Allied production statistics widen the strategic frame. American and British shipyards are launching hundreds of merchant ships monthly, and American factories are producing aircraft and engines at rates once thought impossible. The very scale of Allied output creates gaps in attention because manpower is focused on fronts and factories and not on a single missing prisoner. In camp administration, the protocol for a declared escape is clear. A telegraph to local police, a circular to neighboring stations, an alert to border checkpoints. Those communications are routine and depend on local officials checking names against lists. Best's forged absence has already passed through those wires. The official channels assume a man who has crossed a boundary. They do not expect him to be still inside the very place that reported his absence. That assumption, is what best exploits when he slips out of the castle into the courtyard and moves like a man who is nowhere. Beyond the immediate geography of Colditz, millions of human decisions and the mass of material production create a backdrop. Roads clogged with supplies, factories running around the clock, towns that have learned to look past the small miseries of everyday wartime life. It is a landscape of distraction that hunger and rationing make even more likely to ignore a single man who does not trip the alarms. The war's immensity hides small acts with a kind of statistical inevitability. He moves with stealth through the yard, past the coal bunkers where a thin line of smoke curls up from a wartime fire. The sentry at the gate paces with the practiced boredom of long hours. Best times his walk to the sentry's head cock, the small moment when he looks down to relight a cigarette. He slips through the shadow of a cart and keeps low, ragged shoes whispering on gravel. In the months of planning, they rehearsed every contingency: caught, run, surrender, bleed. But rehearsals cannot account for the tiny human accidents that end escapes. Tonight, a laundry cart with a bucket of hot water will be pushed across his path by a man trying to avoid a puddle. The cart blocks the sentry's view for the fraction of a second he needs. He keeps his face turned away from patrols and moves like a man whose feet know the geography by memory rather than sight. In a lean of seconds, he reaches the outer wall and finds the weak point the nailwork has made for them, a slotted stone that gives when he presses it in the right place. He slips through the narrow breach and lands in a guttered alley on the town side of the wall, wet and smelling of coal and horse urine. For a while he lets the cold shock answer the fear and clamps his hands to stop them from shaking. He is both invisible and a risk. He is officially absent and physically present. The men who wait in the shadow of an alley, other prisoners who have crossed the wall in different times and different ways in earlier escapes, pass him a small bundle of civilian clothes, a cloth cap, and bread wrapped in newspaper. They are two on the edge of freedom. One will attempt to reach a station that night, and Best will do what he always thought he would do if he made it this far. He will try to reach neutral ground or a hiding place with a network to move him further west. For now, he breathes. And then he moves again into a town he has seen only in the thin maps smuggled into camp. A town whose citizens live with ration cards, curfews, and the weight of soldiers on their streets. He keeps his head low. Across the broader theater, the human infrastructure that supports escape and evasion is both fragile and surprisingly resilient. Networks of civilians, railway workers, and farmers sometimes risk punishment to aid fugitives. At other times, they report a stranger for reward or fear. The lines of assistance are not centralized. They are a scatter of personal decisions. The German police system, under strains from partisan activity in the east and sabotage in other areas, simply cannot watch every footpath and track. In 1943, the Gestapo increases surveillance in urban centers, and checkpoints become more common on main highways. Yet smaller towns and rural lanes have thinner coverage. Escape officers from many camps keep lists of sympathetic locals in certain routes that are less monitored on market days when attention is elsewhere. Best must find those hours and not walk into a village where a new poster of wanted men has just been pinned. The Allies' own intelligence services know how to use escaped prisoners when they can. Officers who make it to Britain and beyond provide eyewitness accounts of German dispositions, factory locations, and morale. Information that is valuable to RAF and SOE planners. That potential for intelligence is one reason why many prisoners attempt escape despite personal risk. They do not simply want to be free for their own sake. They see escape as part of the broader fight. The logistics of movement, trains, false papers, sympathetic station clerks depend on 1,000 small favors across borders. Best is aware of these patterns in a general sense. He knows the names of escape routes from the whispered maps and nighttime drawings passed in attic rooms. He also knows that each step outside the camp is a negotiation with fortune and the decisions of strangers. The war's vast machinery may create openings, but it also creates hazards that can close suddenly. For every sympathetic handshake, there is a new informant waiting for coffee. He moves through the town like a man with an invented life. He keeps his shoulders regular, shoulders that have been trained to mask fear with the poise of habit. He changes from the patched uniform into civilian clothes that fit badly, but are better than a prison greatcoat for blending in. He tucks the forged identity note into a seam and pulls a cap low. He purchases a small slice of bread with a coin that has been smuggled for just such a purpose. He eats with the careful hunger of someone who knows the value of food beyond the body. His first aim is a hide recommended by a railway worker who once smuggled parcels to the camps. It is a stable behind a bakery where the owner's sister once helped a work party carrying crates. Best remembers the map sketched in stolen pencil. From the eastern gate, 2 streets north, then a right by the church with the broken steeple, then a courtyard behind a cobbler's shop. He walks those streets thinking of small, specific things. The pattern the cobbler's dog leaves on the ground, the pale blue of a shutter that always hangs open, the way a blind in a particular window catches the sunlight in the same place in afternoon. Those habits become landmarks. He slips into the courtyard and is greeted by a narrow doorway that opens into shadow. Inside, an old man with a rough hand and a soft face hands him a cup of weak coffee and nods as if it is the most natural thing in the world to offer it. The man will not ask questions. He will take the bread and the coin and place a blanket over the shoulders. Best rests for an hour, listening to the muffled conversation of the bakery above, to the clack of a child's toy, to the distant bark of a dog. He is still a shadow, but the immediate danger that made his lungs quicken has passed. He knows there are more steps to come. He has to reach the west line that skews into Berlin, and then to the lines that go beyond Germany's center. The railway timetables in his head are thin and risky. He needs a man at the station, a clerk who will sell him a ticket without a passport, who will not ask awkward questions. This is the kind of favor that sometimes springs from a human pity and sometimes from a corrupt pocket. It may also fail. He has rehearsed the contingency for that failure, but rehearsals do not keep the soul from trembling. While he pauses in the bakery stable, the war's logistics reveal their larger arithmetic. Rail hubs in central Germany are clogged with military traffic, troop trains, armored divisions on flat cars, supply convoys. In wartime, moving a single soldier illegally across such a hub is like trying to slip a pebble through a river's current. The Reichsbahn is efficient, but overburdened. Its schedules are adjusted nightly to account for priorities. Allied intelligence and the Special Operations Executive have detailed lists of routes where escapes succeed more often because of the congestion of military traffic, which distracts attention from civilian movements. Yet those same routes are dangerous because the presence of military units raises the stakes. A discovered escapee near an armored division may face severe consequences, and the locals who help them risk collective punishment. The statistical reality is stark. Many escapees are recaptured within days. Some never make it past the nearest town. In 1943, escapes from Oflags and Stalags occur frequently enough to be a regular concern for German authorities. But the success rate for reaching Allied lines is low without outside assistance. The very scarcity of successful flight makes each one more valuable for intelligence. It is also why German administrative faith in the Kommandantur's records can matter so much. If officials accept that a man has already left and concentrate on recovering him outside the border, they effectively reduce the immediacy of searches inside the region, a bureaucratic shifting of attention that Best has used to his advantage. The war's numbers, train loads, production figures, troop movements, form a backdrop that simultaneously constrains and creates openings for the small, risky acts of individuals. After an hour that feels like a day, Best slips again into the night toward the station. His hands have regained steadiness. He walks through streets where blackout curtains have been hastily patched and where the curfew notices hang like blank warnings on lampposts. The railway station is a place of noise and rust. It smells of coal and grease, and the platforms are lit by low, wartime lamps. He watches men in uniform board trains with portfolios and heavy boots, and he watches families with small bundles, their faces tired and set. He needs a ticket that will allow him to move on a local route away from Colditz that night, not a direct line to the west. Direct lines are watched. Indirect tracks offer the chance to change trains under lesser scrutiny. He finds a porter who looks at him not with the hardness of a guard, but with the weariness of a man who has seen too many requests to worry about one more. The porter takes a coin for a cigarette, and for that small price, agrees to barter a chance. He will route Best onto a workman's train that slogs toward Leipzig before turning west to a junction where a sympathetic signalman sometimes looks the other way. The trade is not heroic. It is small, human, and nearly everything in this part of the war depends on such transactions. Best sits on a bench and waits for the carriage that the porter names. He watches the clock and the slow, steady arrivals and departures, and he understands that every second could contain the difference between freedom and a return to stone walls. He tightens his grip on the small bundle of cloth around his neck, the same bundle that contains the paper listing him as absent in a place that no longer believes he is there. He feels the odd double life he is living, a ghost on paper, a man in the street. The double image holds only as long as men at desks, clerks in small towns, and poor porters keep their eyes away from inconvenient facts. He prays, quietly and without any religious show, to the one small God of practical things. Keep the timetables regular. Keep the open windows closed to rumor. Let the porter keep his promise. When the train doors clatter and the carriage jerks into motion, he feels the motion like a small victory. The platform slides past. The town becomes a blur of chimneys and blacked windows. For a while the carriage rocks, and the engine's rhythm becomes a lullaby that eases the nervous tremors out of his limbs. Around him, the passengers sleep in bundles, and a dog dozes in the corner. He keeps his eyes open and watches the countryside darken to a blacker shade. He thinks of the men he left in the castle, Reed, Wilson, O'Neill, and the others who have risked themselves to create the fiction that let him step through the wall. He thinks of the forged dash that now sits in the Kommandantur's file, and how a small piece of ink can turn the world's attention into a blind. To him, the war narrows into a series of small decisions made by strangers. The porters, the cobbler, the woman in the bakery, the clerk who will sell him a ticket. Each may be the hinge on which his fate turns. He knows his odds are far from certain. The train will stop at junctions, and at some point he will have to change to a slower locales that is less guarded, or perhaps continue riding until he can step off at an unlit stop and walk the remainder of the way. The night is long and the war is longer. Yet for this one brief hour, as the carriage eats up miles and the iron rails hum, he feels the shape of momentum under him, and that momentum is, in itself, a kind of hope. The forged dash has become a doorway. Whether it leads through to freedom or to a harsher fall will depend on thousands of hands he will never meet. The train rattles west through the darkness, its wheels drumming a steady rhythm that feels almost like breathing. Jack Best keeps his head turned toward the window, his reflection ghosted faintly in the glass. In that dim reflection, he looks like every other tired traveler in wartime Germany. A man in worn clothes, collar frayed, eyes sunken with fatigue. Inside, he's counting every stop, every minute, every shift in the rhythm of the track. The porter who took his coin has already disappeared into the other carriage, and now Best is on his own. His false papers, nothing more than a forged worker's certificate with a smeared stamp, are tucked deep in his boot. He clutches a folded scrap of newspaper that makes him look like any laborer on his way to a job. Around him, the carriage hums with muted life. Two soldiers doze against their rifles. A mother rocks a child who's too old to be crying, but cries anyway. The air smells of coal, boiled cabbage, and damp wool. At every station, the doors open and the cold rushes in, bringing the metallic echo of orders shouted on the platform. He has trained his nerves for this, to blend into the fabric of routine until the guard's eyes slide over him without focus. It is a strange skill to erase one's presence by the discipline of calm. At Leipzig, the train grinds to a long halt. Outside, soldiers move with flashlights, checking compartments at random. The announcement echoes down the platform. All passengers to present papers for inspection. Best's pulse jolts once and steadies. The forged dash in the Kommandantur's records has bought him 2 weeks. But beyond the walls of Colditz, the fiction may falter under scrutiny. He adjusts his cap, holds the newspaper open to a crossword, and waits. When the door slides open, the beam of a flashlight catches him in the face. "Papers," the soldier says, voice flat with fatigue. Best produces the folded certificate, smudged and folded to look used. The soldier scans it in the dim light, mutters something about labor transfer, and nods. The papers come back. The beam of the light moves on. Best exhales through his nose and feels a tremor run through his leg. Not fear now, but the residue of it. The train jerks again, pulling away from Leipzig, and the sense of movement returns. The carriage empties at the next few stops until only 4 passengers remain. Each mile west brings a fraction more danger and a fraction more freedom. It is a paradox he has learned to accept. Movement means risk, but standing still means capture. Beyond these individual risks, the war itself is shifting. It is June 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic has reached a turning point. Allied aircraft and escort carriers are destroying U-boats faster than Germany can replace them. In the east, the Wehrmacht prepares for the massive Kursk offensive, assembling thousands of tanks and 500,000 men for what will become the largest armored clash in history. The Luftwaffe's losses over the Ruhr are mounting. And in occupied Europe, underground networks are growing bolder, organizing escapes, sabotaging rail lines, feeding Allied intelligence. Against that immense background, the story of a single British officer sneaking through German railways seems microscopic. Yet in wartime, such microscopic acts have their own gravity. Each one chips away at the myth of control. The Germans have built a machine of order and obedience, a state whose reach is measured in lists and stamps and checkpoints. Best's forged absence exploits that machine's faith in its own order. He has made the system lie to itself. As the train clatters through Saxony toward Thuringia, that lie travels with him, invisible, like a ghost riding the wires. Near dawn, the train reaches a junction where the porter's directions end. The whistle blows, and passengers shuffle off, boots clanging on the platform. Best follows them, head down. The station clock shows 4:15. A mist hangs low, and the horizon is turning gray. He walks out past the sidings where freight cars stand idle, painted with chalk numbers, 14 tons of coal, 10 of grain, 6 of limestone. The industrial rhythm of Germany continues even in exhaustion. Factory whistles, the hiss of steam, the faint clang of distant machinery. Best walks along the road that runs parallel to the tracks until he reaches a bend that hides him from the station. There he steps off the road into the fields. The ground is slick with dew, and the grass soaks through his boots. He walks for hours, stopping only when the sun begins to burn the mist away. The countryside opens before him. Rolling fields, thin woods, a farmhouse on a ridge. In one direction lies the west, Weimar, then Frankfurt, then the borderlands where Allied bombers sometimes cross at night. In another, a network of small roads where patrols sometimes pass. He sits in a ditch, unwraps a crust of bread, and eats slowly. Each mouthful tastes of smoke and grit. He thinks of the other men still behind the walls, their plans, their quiet acts of defiance. His trick has worked longer than any of them hoped. 2 weeks have become 3, and the Germans still believe he escaped miles away. For now, he is winning the slowest race of his life, the race between truth and paperwork.